My name is Doug Wright. I'm the Managing Director for the Centre for Earth and Environmental Technologies at the Ontario Centres of Excellence. And I'm really pleased that we're holding this panel this afternoon, that we were able to bring it to you today, because I've learned over the last couple of years that big ideas require visionary people to come together to make them happen. And what could be a bigger idea than the idea of the green economy? Today we're really lucky to have some people who are participating in the green economy and helping make it happen. And but before we start, and before I introduce our chair, our moderator, I want to acknowledge the generous support of Gowling Lafleur Henderson, the sponsors of this presentation theater. Without their generous support, it wouldn't have been possible to bring you here today to do this. We are lucky to have Andrew Bowerbank, friend and colleague, President and Chief Strategy Officer for the EC3 initiative. If you haven't heard about it, you're going to hear about it today. It's an exciting idea, and it's about leadership and collaboration. Andrew's an authority on green buildings, industrial design, energy and environmental conservation, and low-carbon economies, all the things you need. From 2007 to 2009, Andrew was the founding executive director of the World Green Building Council and a member representative for the United Nations Environmental Program. The UN program's goal is to deliver a framework for global carbon reductions through infrastructure development. And now I turn it over to you, Andrew. Let's have a good conversation, as I know we will.
Thanks, Doug. Thank you very much. So thanks, everybody, for being here. Before we introduced our panelists today, and I'm very glad for everybody being here and participating in this, I want to put a bit of a context together why we're here and some of the issues that we need to consider moving forward into the future. So as Doug mentioned, I've done quite a bit of work lately over the past few years with the United Nations, specifically with their environmental program. And one thing that really stuck out in my mind is noting some of the key factors and features and issues that are coming forward at the global level, whereby right now we have 6.5 billion people on the planet, and they're estimating that will grow to 9 billion people by 2050. We have 50% of us globally living in urban centers. They expect that to grow to 70% by 2050. Right now there are 18 megacities on this planet. That is cities with populations over 10 million people. They expect that to grow to 28 megacities by 2050. So very much issue of resource, it becomes very foremost in our minds. And you look at the building construction sector, as working with the World Green Building Council and the Canada Green Building Council for many years, you look at the global construction output. It's a $4.7 trillion industry, one of the biggest in the world. Employs more than 100 million people worldwide and accounts for 10% of the global gross domestic product. And we look at the work that organizations like the Green Building Councils and others in their various sectors, the work that they're trying to do to make a change, to incorporate environmental initiatives. For example, the LEED rating system in the U.S. is almost a monopoly down there, and the U.S. Green Building Council has done a great job. You have the rating system in Europe, BREEAM, that's very popular, Green Star in Australia and Asia Pacific. But then you take a look at the current marketplace right now with all the work that people have been doing. And with all the construction that's going on around the world, only 8% of buildings are actually moving forward with green building design and development. In transportation, only 6% of transportation uses alternative fuels. Energy, 13% of the energy on this planet is done by renewable sources, and we don't know what the next step is when it comes to pulling back from the use of fossil fuels. How are we going to make a difference? This is the kind of question that we need to ask ourselves. And we know it's about change. Change happens when we collectively get together and decide it's the right thing to do, and there's return on investment for these initiatives from an economic standpoint. It's how we live, how we work, how we play. We all know about the triple bottom line. So the triple bottom line is now moving from theory more to practice and implementation. But the question becomes now, do we really have the global capacity to mobilize in response to some of the key issues like climate change, peak oil, fossil fuels, population in developing nations, and how do we move forward with that? Okay? So the question now becomes, what is the low carbon or green economic success? How does it look for Canada? What's our place in the global scale? And I asked that question quite a few times to some of my associates across sectors that I've been working with. And we thought it was a time to really get together and evaluate this on a more serious note. We held a workshop on August 26th last year. We had 45 CEOs and senior executives come together specifically to talk about these issues. And when I'm attending some of the UN conferences, sometimes I was very much the lone Canadian saying, hey guys, let's take a look at opportunities from our perspective as well. We're a very resource-intensive country. And we also have very strong technological opportunities, but we're also a very large country with a low population. And we have a lot of factors to consider. The workshop was interesting because 3 key factors came out of this that really stood out as things that we need to start working on. First of all, the need for stronger collaboration across sectors. What I mean by that is, soon we're going to have a car plugging into a house, getting energy off of a utility grid. And we're all still working in our silos to create these technologies, but nobody's talking about the infrastructure requirements collectively to make that work. So how do we bring people together to do that? And one of the next steps was, on March 10th, we held a workshop specifically. We had PowerStream, we had Toronto Hydro, talking to Magna and Ford, talking to the Home Builders Association and Minto and Tridel and others, specifically about that infrastructure. So that ability to collaborate in a neutral sense, I think, becomes very important for our next step, especially from a Canadian marketplace. The need for a common voice, in the marketplace. How can we create a unified perspective? And is green the right message? Green is really very much now a branding choice, it's a lifestyle choice, and I think we need to look for economic next step opportunities in a leadership capacity. And one thing I don't think we do very well in this country is celebrate our successes. I don't think we want to get to the extreme of perhaps the bravado of the US and the use of their media and their movie stars and such to get messages across, but maybe there's a lesson learned from that. We do a lot of great pilot projects in this country, but a lot of the resources go towards supporting those pilot projects and demonstrations, but then when that project is done, things get very quiet afterwards. And really, that's when the hard work should begin. How do we continue to provide that opportunity for support? So today we want to talk a bit about these issues, and it is very much an hour only, so you have to bear with us because there's a lot to do. But to start things off, let's introduce the panel that we have today. Starting at my right, we have Laurent Teinturier, President of BASF. Laurent has extensive multinational experience in the polyurethanes industry, now working with his team to support a strong sustainability agenda. And next to Laurent is Ted Simpson, General Manager at Philips Lighting. Ted directs all business activities and is charged with setting the strategic direction for Philips. To my left, immediate left, is Debbie Baxter, VP of Corporate Sustainability and Facilities Management. She's also the Chief Sustainability Officer for Loyalty One and recently led the development of a LEED Gold call center featuring the largest rooftop solar installation in the country. Next to Debbie is Mike Peterson, Group Head of Corporate Operations at TD Financial Group. He's also the co-chair of Greening Greater Toronto Task Force, and Mike is responsible for TD's environmental agenda. So thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. I think we have a good topic to discuss. So to lead things off, I'm going to turn to Laurent and talk a little bit about BASF as a chemical company that provides base materials to businesses that develop products that society uses every day. Right? Over the past few years, BASF has developed a strategy in support of sustainable development and energy resource conservation. And through discussions that Laurent and I have had over the past few weeks prior to Discovery, we've reviewed the importance of collaboration in support of change in the marketplace. A key factor of collaborations starts with internal buy-in. How do you get the corporate internal mindset to shift and then look at ways of transposing that outwards? So my question is really about how has BASF team globally, as well as in Canada, responded to this shift in corporate responsibility, and how effective have you been at spreading this message to your clients in the use of materials?
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. I think we can say sustainable development is a long-standing corporate core value at BASF, and with what it means in terms of sustainability, in terms of responsibility for environment as well as for social aspects, it is definitely an integral part of the BASF strategy. Like any successful company, we obviously try to meet our short-term objectives, but we also lay the foundation for the long term. Perhaps I would like to mention some major achievements of BASF in this field, just showing that the strategy reflects into tangible facts. Let's start with a kind of a wild German name. Sorry, BASF is initially a German company. Verbund, which you cannot directly translate into English. Verbund is a production concept developed by BASF. All plants on one industrial site are networked so that all byproducts and the heat from one chemical process is going to provide with feedstock and energy for the next chemical process, which looks very simple in words, is very complex in fact, and of course allows that nothing is lost at the end. In what is the value for environment? For our major site in Germany, headquarters of BASF, it means 1.5 million metric tons of CO2 in annual savings, which is of course absolutely huge. If we go back to 1996, BASF was developing at this time a methodology which became famous under the name of eco-efficiency analysis and has been recognized now by many official and international third parties. And the principle of it is to measure the economical as well as environmental impact of any process or product all along the life cycle and from an end consumer perspective. And we use this tool, by the way, also available for our customers, to really make choices between various technologies, what is the best suited in terms of economics, but also in terms of environment. In 2008, BASF was the first company in the world to present a comprehensive carbon footprint for all of our products, which means we made the analysis of all products all along their life cycle from sourcing raw materials to product disposal and calculating what was the whole environmental impact of that. And the result was a carbon footprint balance of 3:1, which means for all of BASF products, there is 3 times more climate-relevant gases saved than produced during their manufacture, use, and disposal. This is one approach that we are now, of course, developing directly with our customers. Certain products, like, for instance, insulation materials for the refrigeration chain, so from the crop in the field to the end consumer plate, may reach a carbon footprint in the range of 16:1, which is, of course, very positive. We have developed at BASF Canada an insulation and wall barrier concept for residential construction. The name is Wall-Tight. And with this, we are doing a lot more than just selling the stuff. It's not about having a price and having a product. We are really engaging our customers to involve into the eco-efficiency analysis of the product. We are delivering eco-efficiency fingerprints for them. It's not one product and one price. Again, this is a total cost of ownership of the product, and this is the environmental impact of the product from cradle to grave. And this is, of course, one very interesting approach, which is changing the terms of partnership and collaboration with customers. Certain of our crop protection products, for instance, beyond the direct effects they have on plants, also have a very positive impact on environment, like, for instance, setting better harvesting conditions, which allows to save something like 3,000 liters of fuel per 1,000 acres harvested. And this is also something that we want to put into the dialogue with customers.
So, Laurent, we have a good opportunity now with the work that you're doing, and perhaps we can bring the other panel into this, and the idea of the tools and resources that your clients need to build on that leadership that you brought forward. So maybe there's others here that have that kind of perspective on what kind of support can you give to clients for advancing products into the marketplace. Anybody?
So I'll go first. We believe that a more sustainable organization is a more competitive one. So doing the same amount of work with less inputs and controlling the outputs and being responsible from the outputs from your process. So there's an obligation, I think, in the current marketplace where companies need a social license to operate to really be looking at these kind of innovations and incorporating them into your business model. So we have lots of examples where we try to do that at Loyalty One. Certainly our solar roof that was mentioned, is kind of an example of that. Like we really went out early with a large solar rooftop early in the Green Energy Act deployment before all the details actually got finalized in an effort to kind of spur that wave and to hope that other companies would follow our lead from a renewable energy standpoint. So I think that type of corporate investment is important to leverage these kind of new developments.
And what about the idea of systems thinking? I mean, I think one thing I mentioned at the very beginning is, we are as a society right now very silo focused. We work in our own sectors, our own industries, and the need to really not only look at cross-sector collaborative opportunities, but I think systems management and system thinking across a broad opportunities. I think that's where the financial sector becomes very important in engaging with the product developers. Is there anybody who can put some comments to that around the systems thinking requirements and getting out of silo mechanisms for work?
Sure. Right, my business is lighting. So we've been making lighting for 100 years, and if you think about it at its most basic level, we have our product because you have humans doing tasks, and what they're doing requires different types of lighting, right? So traditionally, people have balanced this lighting requirements three ways. One is the human part of it, what you're doing in that space. The second part is the economical side, how much does that lighting cost? And the third side is this third part that's emerging is its impact to the environment. Traditionally, the the part of the equation that's been the most important has been the cost. And in that model, you didn't have to have a lot of collaboration. You had to have a good cost. Today, people are more interested in the impact to the environment and the human aspect. So in that case, it's really important that we work as an industry to set benchmarks, levels, and collaboratively to make these systems in a way that deliver against the promises, right?
But then we have to bring into the equation, you're developing and providing the products to be used in the buildings. But maybe, Mike, I can ask you, perhaps from a TD point of view, when you are someone who has a lot of facilities under TD, a lot of banks, a lot of infrastructure to look at, what's the aggressive focus on reducing energy, and how important is that, especially in today's economic times? Is there something you can address in that area?
Well, so I think the collaboration thing is a big deal, and the systems thinking element, and that goes whether you're talking about that question or how we deal with our clients, which range from governments to renewable entrepreneurs to oil and gas companies to retail customers and so on. The footprint issue for us is different. A bank is not a great emitter as a result of our operations, but we nevertheless decided to be carbon neutral anyways. But the reason we did was so that we had our own house in order before we started to try to deliver products and services for clients that were environmentally friendly. And I must say that was an experience that we hadn't anticipated, in the sense that we didn't know how little we understood. And the simple act of trying to convince a board of directors, a CEO, all my executive colleagues, our 75,000 employees, and literally 20 million customers, including those oil and gas customers in Calgary, that it was a good thing for a bank to become carbon neutral was a much bigger undertaking than I had anticipated, and just required an immense amount of education and dialogue, frankly. And then to do it, we had to bring in environmental NGOs, we had to bring in service providers, verifiers, we had to consult with Aboriginal groups, we had to consult in all the communities we operate in, 2,000 plus, etc. So it's been an enormous job. We've come through that now, and now we're engaged with clients and products and service design and so on, and that requires a whole other series of bilateral, trilateral, multilateral engagement with all kinds of stakeholders. So this is how we're going to make progress.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Ted, let me take it back to you then, and it sort of goes into our next big question. Philips is on the leading edge of new technologies, and you were talking a bit about this, and really has some aggressive strategies to reduce energy consumption in buildings and products. And we talked about this over breakfast the other day as well. And as I mentioned earlier, with population growth expected on this planet, and our current state of energy and lighting in buildings today, can you talk a bit more about how Philips is addressing the scale of change needed, and how is this going to take place and have an effective impact in the amount of work that we need to do?
Okay. So two parts. First, I'll tackle existing buildings, right? And I'll just preface this because there's a huge opportunity there. We're very popular in lighting with private and public entities that want to improve their environmental footprint. The rationale is twofold, right? One is 17% of an average building's electrical usage is used for lighting. So 17% of it's used for lighting. And the second part of that equation is, it's not a science, but roughly 80% of the sockets are housing in obsolete technology. In other words, the light bulbs change since somebody's put it in. So there's something available that can save energy, has less toxicity, can improve the lighting, and can last longer. So they're very popular. I mean, if you think about this, if we pulled this off globally, right? Let's just say we save 20% in energy, right? Existing buildings. The numbers are staggering. It's 800 million barrels of oil annually we would reduce. So think about the U.S., that's 33 days of demand. If you don't use that oil, right, it's 300 million tons of CO2. And it's roughly about 265 power plants. So it's huge, right? So there's a lot against that. But you asked me two parts of the question. So then going forward, right? So going forward, how do we approach it? There's three thrusts. I would say the most important one is the people side, right? Because those buildings we discuss are going to have people in them, right? And the people are going to be engaged. Those buildings are going to be used for selling things. They're going to be used for offices. They're going to be used for hospitals. And so what my company does is we organize around those market segments, right? Because those buildings, 5 years from now, those people in those buildings are going to have different needs. So we attack it this way. We organize ourselves around like retail, hospitality, offices, healthcare, and we go about understanding what the needs will be 5 years from now. Both from an application and a sheer volume, right? Because they're all going to grow at different paces. The second part of that would be that you need to partner with the right people. Somebody said something smart, you know, we know what we know what we don't know. We're pretty good at making lighting, but there's folks out there that are better at the design. There's folks that are better at the installation. A lot of go-to-market folks are much better than we could do. And so we balance that around the world, right? Like, so Brazil, India, China, I mean, they're growing at an amazing pace. I mean, China has, what, 500 cities, more than 1 million people today? So the third part then would be, then you got to use your insights and use your piggy bank to come up with some breakthrough solutions that are relevant 5 years from now. For us, that means making big bets. An example would be LEDs, right? You guys know LEDs maybe from your dashboards and traffic lights. We're making a big bet that we can transition this technology from lighting to be seen, I'll say, to lighting to see with, right? And we think it makes a lot of sense with what we know about the technology, the energy efficiency it affords, the less toxicity, and the longevity of the light source. So 3 ways we go about it is, one, I mean, it's logical, right? The little source, right? That's the engine. We partnered with Hewlett-Packard back in the early 90s because the two of us were able to get the most light output out of this little eraser-sized diode. Since then, we've taken over that. Then you figure that this thing lasts a long time. Now I have a light bulb that lasts 45,000 hours, right? So this building isn't going to be replacing light bulbs every 2 to 3 years. They're going to be putting up a fixture that they replace every 6 to 10 years, right? So locally, we bought the biggest lighting manufacturer. We're known locally as Canlight, Lumec, Leda-Light, or Thomas Lighting, right? So we have to incorporate that into our thinking. And then finally, the cool thing about these LEDs is they come in different colors, and you can make some really dramatic lighting effects. If anybody's around tonight, take a look at the CN Tower, right? The company that puts that light show on every night is the Philips company. It's Color Kinetics. So for us, then we invest in the dynamic part of that. So, I mean, it's a big question.
Sure. But I
that's
also
sort of
think,
how we prepare.
yeah, and I think the other side of that, as we discussed previously, is this idea of market awareness as well. I mean, you build a product and you get it to the point where it's very effective from your standpoint as a developer, but then it has to get out into the marketplace. And there needs to be that market awareness opportunity with that. And unfortunately, in the marketplace right now, a lot of products that are being touted as green are also being looked at as inferior or more costly. And we need to look at what is the opportunities to change that a little bit. And I think some of it, maybe back to Laurent to respond to this, is one of the things I remember, and sorry for a personal note on this, but my father used to be a general manager for BASF many years ago. And one of the things I've always liked is the idea that BASF doesn't make the products we use, BASF makes them better. So how do you bring that messaging into green products to support the work that we're doing?
Well, I think that first of all, perhaps a part of the answer is in the question, what's green exactly? And I'm afraid that people are a little overwhelmed with kinds of messages from advertising to supposed to be official information about my product is green and my product is green. And I think it becomes really very important to try to establish, and this is about collaboration, clear standards about what is going to happen here. I could certainly mention that not later than April of this year, so that's just a few weeks ago, BASF has been the first chemical company to enter the sustainability consortium, and this is a coalition of corporates, of associations, of individuals at an international level, and we have the goal to develop a global database of information on life cycle analysis for end consumer products. Finally, what we want to try to create is a credible, a transparent, and user-friendly standard for measuring the real sustainability of consumer product. I think user-friendly is not unimportant because it's very difficult for somebody not a specialist to really understand what it is about. So finally, you get more confused than anything else with all messages about green. So I think that's really very important at this stage.
All right, thanks, Laurent. And I think that'll bring me to the question for Debbie. It's one of the primary barriers for effective market transformation in Canada appears to be our poor track record with promotions, and I talked about this a little bit at the beginning, and the idea of celebrating our successes a bit better. Adding to this, there's a growing example of products and initiatives that are providing effective results, but they're very difficult to keep these in the public eye, right? So what I was wondering, Loyalty One, as a well-recognized leader in marketing and consumer loyalty programs, has a strong commitment to environmental responsibility, as we are all learning very well over the past while. Do you agree with this perspective, and what lessons can Loyalty One bring to the Canadian marketplace to support new aggressive market awareness and social adoption strategies for the green economy?
So, as many of you may be aware, Loyalty One is the operator of the Air Miles Reward Program. So if I could actually see past the lights, I would ask how many collectors there are in the room, but I can't really see, so there's no point in sticking up your hands. But 70% of Canadians participate actively in the program. So that means that we talk regularly to about 10 million Canadian households. So we have quite a voice, and we take that very seriously. And that opportunity to reach Canadians is something that really prompted a lot of our thoughts in the sustainability area. So to kind of give you the history, we had a grassroots movement, lots of employees really engaged with that program, and the question was asked, why not try and take some of these messages to Canadians and help them to understand what some of their options are. So I think some of the lessons that we can bring forward are around the My Planet program that we launched in 2009. And the My Planet program, for those of you who are not familiar, consists of 3 areas. So collectors have the opportunity to go to our website and learn about different techniques, different products, different government rebates that exist, various tips and tricks on how to lead a more sustainable life. They also have the opportunity to redeem their miles for a variety. I think it's something like 140 green products are now listed in our catalog. One of the misconceptions about our program is that it's really not about air travel. So 92% of redemptions actually happen for product. And we thought, why not put a whole bunch of green products in that catalog so that Canadian collectors can choose a more environmentally sustainable choice when they're making a redemption. So, interesting things like composters and solar panels and solar-powered watches. I actually ordered this one. Lots of different things. Luggage made out of recycled plastic, all kinds of different innovative products that we profile as part of our program. So we take that voice and that reach and apply it to some of these innovative products in an effort to put them in front of Canadians and educate them about some of the product options that are available to them. So perhaps they think a little bit differently after going through that process. They also have the opportunity to earn miles at retailers, so giving retailers the option of shining this light on the products that they put on their shelves as well. So perhaps it's a local wine at the LCBO, or one of the organic products available at Metro, and our collectors have the opportunity to earn bonus miles, which does drive behavior. So collectors will look for those bonus offers and buy those products instead of something that they would perhaps traditionally choose. So we've found that harnessing the power and reach of our program to shine the light on some of these sustainable options in the marketplace has been a very successful approach for us.
So maybe that will lead very well to sort of my next thought in this, and it's really around, we're talking a bit about the idea of collaboration, but our marketplace is very much built on a competitive structure. When you want to collaborate, there's also a desire to make sure that the things that you are working on are kept very confidential to certain points. And you look at, for example, Anthony Watanabe that we all know from Innovolve Group works with Procter & Gamble. And one of the great things I remember him telling me about was when Procter & Gamble and Tide got together and looked at concentrating the detergents and making the bottles smaller, and they've got an environmental message around that, but definitely wasn't done from an environmental purpose. It was about saving money, and everything from shipping the products and everything else was saved. But they decided not to keep that. They gave that to everybody and still allowed the competitive nature within the marketplace to drive forward, and there was an environmental benefit to that. So with the competitive nature of things like loyalty programs and others, how do we try and break through that a bit and allow collaboration to benefit everybody as a society as we move forward? I don't know who wants to try and tackle that one, but that's sort of my thought. Competition versus collaboration is a bit of an issue.
I guess, the burning platform is important. I'll just use that as an example. And I can just speak from my industry, right? So in lighting, I'll throw a statistic. There's 18 billion light bulbs made every year around the world. We know that because we make about a third. And 11 billion of them are still incandescent light bulbs. So that's incredible to me. These light bulbs are basically mini heaters. They that 60% of all the light bulbs only generate 4% of the heat. Or the light, right? So 60% of them produce 4% of the light. I mean, that's ridiculous. So there was a burning platform. So there it's sort of like the guys in lighting, you look at that and you say, okay, let's get together and we got to tackle this thing as a joined body, Mm-hmm. So I think what happens sometimes is we have a mismatch of what we think is a competitive advantage, and you should probably put that aside in this and say, from the Earth standpoint, that's not really a competitive advantage. That's the cost of entry. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. And that's great, and it takes me to the next thought about how do we get the collaborative mechanism and allow the corporate structure to still do what it does well in order to drive the economy. And obviously we have a panel group that is industry focused, and Laurent and I talked about the fact that in order to really push big change, solutions have to come through industry leaders. That's very important. I think government has to be there to help drive and support. But the other element of this is getting the message out. And non-government organizations, not-for-profit organizations and others are an important part of that. And I think the question now coming to you, Mike, is as the co-chair of Greening Greater Toronto, the work of non-government organizations play an important role in bringing these issues and ideas forward. In 2008, Greening Greater Toronto set an ambitious goal to make the GTA the greenest city region in North America. Right? What strategies have been put in place to accomplish this goal, and what concerns or perhaps surprises or barriers have the Greening Greater Toronto come up against in these efforts, and what strategic models are being put in place to help secure success in the marketplace?
So I will answer the question, but I'd like to just comment on the previous discussion for a minute, if I may, because I find in these discussions that we sometimes duck an issue that Canadians love to duck, which is how do we really change behaviors, and can pricing or economics play a bigger role in that? And we duck that, whether it's healthcare or transportation or waste or carbon emissions, and I'm going to come back to how you can sell more lighting. Because if you think about when there's been dramatic change on issues that affect the environment in the past, it has been, in many cases, when some economic lever was applied. So in the 70s, when manufacturers of cars started building small cars, it was because gas prices went up. Even today, if you talk to car dealers, they will tell you that the rate of sales of hybrid vehicles has nothing to do with how important people think the environment is, or little to do with it. It has everything to do with the current price of gas. So I don't think we can duck this, and you know, we obviously need a price on carbon in some fashion. We need a price on water. We need to, you know, call a spade and admit how heavily subsidized electricity is. We need to find a way to charge for moving our vehicles around in urban areas and so on, because that's a third of the emissions in GTA and so on. And on a micro level, I'll just tell you that having set this goal of carbon neutral at TD was transformative, because effectively it put a price on carbon inside the bank. Because it meant that if some branch manager didn't put the lighting in, then we would have additional emissions, and we'd have to pay for that at $30 a ton by buying offsets. So it instantly changed behavior. And if I could give you one piece of advice, no matter what kind of organization you run, set a target for your emissions. It doesn't have to be a zero, it doesn't have to be a reduction even, it has to be a limitation. The minute you do, there's a cost on carbon, and everybody starts to think differently. They work it into their business cases, and you get such learning and light bulbs going on. So that was just a little response to that, because I think that's a really important point.
Well, Mike, maybe we can ask someone else to comment. Is there any further? That's a really good point. I don't know, Debbie, if you have a perspective on
Totally agree.
Good.
that? Okay. So perhaps now we can go on to your role as the NGO.
This Greening Greater Toronto thing, for those of you who don't know, I co-chair this with Eva Leggetti of the Clean Air Partnership here in Toronto, and formerly with David Pico, who sadly passed away, and now Killian Burtz, his colleague. And the idea was to try to take a regional perspective on some of the problems related to the environment. We recognized that there was lots of good work being done within each municipality, within the City of Toronto, but that some of these issues actually couldn't be resolved within a municipality or a city. You had to take a regional perspective. So we looked at what were those issues, and which ones was there not something being done at. And the first thing we did was gather together as many stakeholders or constituents we could. We managed to get over 150 different organizations, so corporations, universities, labor organizations, arts organizations, many NGOs, of course, in the environment field. And we worked over a period of 7 to 8 months to try to come up with some specific initiatives that we could get everybody to agree on. Wasn't easy, but we did it. And secondly, we thought would have some impact. So I'll share 3 with you today. The first is that we've launched Canada's first voluntary offset fund. And the way this works is that if, for example, in Debbie's organization, they say they want to reduce their carbon footprint, and they want to buy offsets because they've already done a whole bunch of energy efficiency stuff. Maybe they're using greener energy. There's some little part left that they have to reduce through offsets. Well, this fund can actually provide them with offsets that are created locally in the community and that benefit charities, hospitals, schools, or so on. So in TD's case, we've invested millions of dollars in this thing, and what happens is they take those millions of dollars and they pay for the installation of geothermal energy in school boards. You know, the school's thrilled about it. They get more efficient operating environment. It's good for the environment, and we get to say we're carbon neutral. So this fund operates like that. The second initiative is dealing with commercial building retrofits and energy, so this will be of interest to you as well. And what we've basically done there is gotten together the biggest landlords and tenants in the GTA area, and together they represent 40% of the commercial building footprint in Toronto. And we've asked them to work together to overcome the obstacles that each of them on their own can't overcome. So doing all kinds of things. They're actually sharing voluntarily information as competitors, these big landlords. landlords and these big tenants, all the banks are involved, for example, about how they're reducing their footprint in their buildings. They're doing case studies where they bring in people who can hear how, for example, Brookfield and one of their tenants have reduced energy use in one of their buildings, and it's really actually quite terrific. And then the last one, same principle, it's on procurement. We've drawn together 48 big organizations, including governments, banks, businesses, that collectively spend over $50 billion every year here in Toronto. They're based here in Toronto. And we've asked them to work on how can they buy greener. So they're holding workshops, they're meeting with technology companies, they're meeting with green suppliers, and the goal is to get them to invest in some of these green products and services, thereby stimulate more innovation, more economic activity, thereby creating more demand, so creating a virtuous circle. But to your point, Andrew, it's all come about because of unprecedented collaboration. These were vicious competitors. They were landlord and tenant who were formerly opposed in terms of their vested interests. They're now working together, admittedly on this narrow issue, but it's really fun to see what's coming out of it.
That's great. And I guess the successes of Greener Greater Toronto, especially as a leadership organization with all this great work, you look at some of the other NGOs that are out there and you almost want to package the lessons learned from some of these things and give some tools and resources to other groups. Would you mind talking a little bit, I think, about how the NGO structure in Canada could maybe benefit from that kind of lessons learned? Is that a fair question?
Yeah, so I'm probably not an expert in answering that question, but one of the lessons has been the access to information.
Right.
Just that simple issue, and I work in a bank of 75,000 people. We have analysts and statisticians and economists. I thought I could get almost any data I wanted.
Right.
But it's just been remarkable to work with the NGOs, to work with other companies, to work with governments, frankly, what we were able to put together in terms of information, and everybody's better for it. Mm-hmm. And like you have seen over the years, even within just the environmental NGO community, a fair bit of silo behavior, never mind between NGOs and industry and government and so on. So I think everybody's waking up to the fact that we're not going to solve this on our own. There has to be collective collaboration, and the more of it, the better. Yeah. Like one thing I would say, for example, is, I sit here as a Canadian, and it's real shame that, anybody you sent to Canada who didn't know the country would instantly realize that our biggest advantage as a country is our land, our water, our energy resources, and so on. But we don't have a strategy framework for energy across the country. And partly it's because industry hasn't wanted to, Alberta hasn't wanted to talk to Quebec, never mind industry hasn't wanted to talk to industry. And certainly the NGOs haven't talked to industry, and the renewables industry hasn't talked to the traditional fuels industry. We have to find a way to get this together. It's starting to happen, but until we have that framework, we can't solve for some of these other smaller problems.
And is the NGO model the solution to help create that, do you think, or is there something we haven't thought of yet?
I think it is, and they have been terrific. The NGOs are the ones that give the extra inch every time to make these things happen.
Yeah, and I find though some of the resources that are available to NGOs are not quite what they should be in Canada, anyways. I mean, you look at just from personal experience, the U.S. Green Building Council. It's a multi-million-dollar organization. It's got a couple of hundred people on staff. LEED rating program is doing great from their perspective. And in fact, they actually have people in the White House in the Obama administration. So I think the respect from the NGO perspective in the U.S. is fair different than what it is over here. And even if, on occasion, if you say something like a nonprofit organization, a mindset all of a sudden or a perspective comes about on what an NGO is all about. And I'm wondering if that's something we need as industry leaders to try and shift a little bit. Allow NGOs to work together, provide resources for them to create that common voice, perhaps in the marketplace. I don't know if anybody wants to talk a bit about that from a strategy point of view.
One of the comments that I would make is that, we're a member of the task force for the Greening Greater Toronto, so I kind of have the inside perspective, and the issues that that Mike was speaking to, that the task force has taken on, are very practical, real challenges for business. So it's not perhaps an esoteric concept, and it's not something that's maybe a bit removed from the business reality or the life in Toronto reality. It's a practical issue between tenants and landlords, and speaking personally from my experience at Loyalty One, it's a real challenge to get through those kind of negotiations and differences and find the way to that solution without the collaboration. So the Greening Greater Toronto approach has really been to take practical issues, find practical solutions with the collaboration of business involved. So I think that's a real path to success.
Thanks, Debbie. Okay. So that's going to bring me to a question that I've been trying to figure out how to ask in a way that kind can perhaps stimulate conversation beyond just this panel. And it's really around Canada as a resource-intensive country. We have a small population, as I mentioned earlier. We have a large geographic area. And I'm wondering really what can Canadian industry leaders bring to the efforts of the global green economy? And to set that question and give it a bit of context, the UN Climate Finance Committee globally, who's co-chaired by Gordon Brown and also the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, made a very bold statement a few months ago that $30 billion of funding will be provided specifically to carbon reduction targets in developing nations. And the question came to the leaders at the conference they were at where this money was going to come from, and they went specifically from industry. And it was quiet for a minute. And you think about that, what that means, and Canada as a very resource-intensive country, as I mentioned, 85% of our technology is already at the top of what's happening in the world. So to make adjustments for the sake of climate change and others, this is some of the reasons why we're being challenged internationally. So I think this is a very broad and very interesting question, and it's not necessarily going to give us an answer today. But it would be interesting to see if everybody can comment quickly on really that Canadian leadership from a global perspective. Most of us here work at the global level for certain projects, and maybe we can use this question to put final comments on the table around that and how we're going to bring that forward and represent Canada internationally a bit better. Anybody want to start that one off?
Well, from working for an international company, right? The way we position ourselves in Canada is we want to be at the front end and we want to be the pilot. We're a decent sized market, but versus some of the huge markets, we're relatively smaller. So from our perspective, we positioned ourselves as the lead user, you know, and so we get first crack at some of these technologies and give it a go. At the end of the day, it's a business, right? And so if there's not a return for TD on the lighting, and there's not a return in the business community, in the energy savings and what have you, then you don't have very much of a value proposition. So these new technologies cost money. And so from our standpoint, we try them out in Canada. And we somewhat, as an organization, subsidize it a bit, because we understand that if you can't do the math on your payback, then it's a very short conversation.
Mm-hmm. And Laurent, from an international point of view as well, I'm wondering, BASF Canada, how well is that, the perspectives of the Canadian efforts, your offices specifically, how are they received internationally? Are we considered an international leader that we can support and bring information to the rest of BASF from your perspective?
Well, I think I would like to say that we also have some reasons to be proud as Canadian. By the way, I'm not Canadian, but only working in Canada for 1 year, but I think I already love this country. And I'm very proud, at least, that our teams were developing pretty interesting and attractive concepts for building installations, particularly, which now we are exporting in other parts of the world, in Europe, for instance, or in Far East, in China, and where we are reproducing these very successful models. So I think that there are really good things that are made here, and our global community and network at BASF is really paying a lot of attention to that. Perhaps I'd like to mention that, and it is a very good example of cooperation. We had one with a Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation for developing the Now House. It's a net zero energy house developed here in Canada, in which recently won one award at the World Urban Forum in Rio de Janeiro for the best residential construction. And this technology, this Now House, is incorporating some of our installation technologies. Nobody spoke about BASF in Rio de Janeiro, and that's not the point. We don't care. What is interesting is that through local cooperations and partnerships, we can also bring very good solutions to the rest of the world. It's absolutely clear for BASF that being a global company active in many countries of the world, we also try the other way around to learn from others and to import interesting technologies. We are at the moment partnering with the Emirate Abu Dhabi to create the famous Masdar project city, going to be normally the first carbon neutral and zero waste city in the world, and we already have a lot of learnings in this project, which we of course try also to bring back to Canada. So I think there are good reasons to hope. It's perhaps not to forget that the Canadian chemical industry is home for the responsible care principle, which now has been expanded to most of the industrialized nations in this world. And responsible care, that's not only care about profit, that's about also be responsible for what we do in the society and with the environment. And that's also go beyond the legal requirements, for instance, to achieve the very best we can. And I think a good definition of leaders is perhaps people able to create hope. And why not hope that Canada may also play a role in that and also push forwards towards this low-carbon economy, like we did for responsible care. Very easy to say, but anyway, we are there for that today, I think, and that's something we can at least try. And having this kind of dialogue may be a very good start, I think.
Yeah. Thanks, Laurent. Mike, can I ask you a little bit about, from a finance point of view, obviously, past number of years, especially with the economic crisis, the Canadian banking system has really had a leadership role and people are very much watching our banking system. Is there an opportunity to leverage that and bring messages of green and sustainability not only out from Canada, but also back in as well from a global perspective? Is that fair to ask you that kind of question?
It's fair to ask. I think we're obviously, if you think about all these sustainability and environment and energy trends, these are, mega trends that are playing out over a long period of time, and right now it's waned a bit because of the global recession, and I don't think there are a lot of banks in the world during the last 2 years that have been thinking about the green agenda in a really meaningful way. Canadian banks have had the luxury of doing that because we have managed to avoid most of the pitfalls, but even in Canadian banks, I would say that, had we not encountered this turbulence, we probably would be farther ahead than we are. Where I do think it's important, and it relates a little bit to the discussion you just had, and you talked about the price to address emissions issues in the developing world. But frankly, that's a pittance in the overall scheme of the issues that we face, because when the developing world issues are bigger, and when you add all the other sustainability issues to it, whether it's our water infrastructure or transportation infrastructure or healthcare for that matter, I have to be careful what I say here as a banker in a public forum, but a cynic might say that this generation and the Western world in particular are borrowing from future generations and borrowing from the emerging markets, and we need to find a way to address that, and I think you can address it. There is no scenario where you can generate the funds that you seek through taxation or something like that. That's a short-term game. But what corporations are increasingly realizing is that those mega trends represent tremendous opportunities, and BASF is a great example, as are you guys, with the products you provide. And somebody said a few minutes ago that it has to be down to industry. I don't quite agree, because if you look at the really breakthrough phenomena in clean tech or renewables around the world, it's often been the government that has paved the way. In the U.S., it certainly has. In BC, it is. Frankly, here in Ontario, whatever you may think of the Clean Energy Act and all of that stuff, it's creating tremendous innovation, entrepreneurial activity. The big banks are suddenly financing that stuff. They didn't have groups that did that a year ago. So there is a role for government to play, and I think the game is to try to create economic development on the back of these megatrends, which we've been really poor at. And now we have China being, number one in the world for solar panel production, number one in the world for wind turbines, and we just didn't think about that, and we have a very short time to catch up, and that's what we got to do. That will create more revenues to address some of these expenditure issues.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Mike. And it's interesting because as we're coming to the end of the panel, it's almost like a feeling where our energy is and the ability to discuss is actually coming about. If we could use one more hour, and I think to get down to some really good points. So, but I do need to say thanks to the panelists. It's been a great 1 hour conversation. Thanks to OCE and to Doug for hosting this. It was great. I think there's still a lot to talk about in this area, and I definitely don't want to consider this a one-time deal. I would definitely like to look for new opportunities to present ideas and strategize and collaboratively talk about things in the future. So I encourage everybody to continue the work that you are doing and explore within your company's organizations opportunities to support Canada's green economy. So enjoy the rest of Discovery on behalf of the panel, and Doug, if you want to close it out.
Well, sure. If anybody asks you if there's a green economy, you can tell them it's at least covering 15 billion light bulbs, 10 million families, 75,000 employees, $50 billion in spending. Did I get the order of magnitude right? I think I did. This was when Andrew and I tossed around the idea of having this panel. It seemed like a good idea. Then we started talking about the people who could be on it. Great idea. Important discussion. I'm very grateful, Andrew and I are, OCE is grateful for the time that all of you have spent today. Mike, Debbie, Ted, Laurent, we really appreciate your coming here today. And Andrew, I'd really like to congratulate you on steering a very good discussion, getting lots of points out there and sharing perspectives amongst the panel members. Also like to thank once again Gowlings for supporting the financing of this theater today, making it possible, and for all of you for coming. I'm supposed to tell you that in a few minutes there's going to be a session on manufacturing here, but way over on the other side I'm introducing another session on water, so you're welcome to join that too. Once again, thank you to all our panel members and especially to Andrew for making this happen.